All right.
All right, we are recording.
Okay. And what are we looking at there?
That's me and my notes. I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm trying to get the agenda up. Just a moment, sir. Here we go. All right, we're going.
All right. The Global Warming Committee is now in order. Please call the roll.
Chair Wiener,
Here.
do I go ahead and call Andrew and Aaron and John?
No.
No, just the members.
Okay.
Yeah. So you need to actually officially ask if Director Stanley has arrived. And
okay. Thank you. Member Stanley is absent or late?
oh, wait a second.
She sent something in here.
She says I'm a participant.
Here.
Okay, let me go kick her over into the right area. No, not that one. Going from screen share to no screen share is weird.
Yeah, it takes a minute. You see some clocking and then magic happens. I was on
I always put you guys in as panelists, so I don't understand. Like if you came in from the link this morning, you probably did end up as a guest instead of a panelist. If it was the original invite, you would have been a guest. Okay.
I came in. It seems like when I use the links on my cell phone, it works like flawlessly.
Oh.
But when I use my MacBook Pro, I do not get brought into Zoom. I'm asked to download yet another copy of Zoom. So I just start my application and use the included password and if there is one, and meeting number in Zoom directly. And then Zoom doesn't behave like I'm a panelist, it behaves like I'm a guest.
Yeah, that's what I'm not understanding.
Why that happens. So,
I did go ahead and unmute Member Stanley. Can you try to say something, please? Member Stanley? I've unmuted her, but she's not hearing me. Okay, well, we know she's here. There she is. Are you?
Yeah, you gotta wait for me to do all my logging in, because I log in with my cell phone for my voice.
It's a deal.
It takes a minute.
And we just took roll, so.
Yes, I said yes.
Are you here? Are you here, Member Stanley?
Yes.
it'd be great
Okay.
if the notes said Director Stanley, recording Director Stanley's no answer.
Okay, definitely, we've got that.
Don't do that.
All right, let me bring up the agenda again, everybody.
All right, so next is, oh, I forgot to put the flag in the background.
Well, the next thing is the Pledge of Allegiance, or observation of a moment of silence.
May we just observe a moment of silence, please?
I think that's a good idea. Thank you, sir.
All right, I've said it in my head. Thank you all. Next item, please.
Number 2 is the approval of the agenda order. Would you like me to read it?
Yes.
It is any member of the board/committee may request an agenda item be postponed, removed, or heard out of order. An item may not be added to the agenda unless it meets the requirements of an emergency situation as defined by Government Code Section 54956.5.
Director Stanley, do you approve the
I so moved.
second? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The agenda has been approved. I think in a regular meeting, we have to go, all votes have to be, per the Brown Act, recorded by, what do you call it, calling the roll. But I'm pretty sure we don't need to do that.
Do you want to do it just to be on the safe side, sir?
No, I'm pretty sure we don't need it.
Okay. All right.
What? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Shit.
That was recorded.
I just lost.
Director Stanley?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I hear the movement of things. Director Stanley, oh, she left.
Uh-oh. Let me come out of stop share.
Well, I think we can go, you can do the next item without Director Stanley's presence.
All right, just one moment, please. Let me go
She's
back
back.
to share. She's back. Okay.
You don't need to read the whole thing, just mention
Okay.
it.
Number 3 is public comment, and I did not receive any public comments.
We can see that no public is attending.
They don't know what they're missing.
This is the
Number-
best meeting ever.
Yeah, exactly.
So far, but in general.
Don't worry, they can watch this later. Number 4, consent calendars. Consent calendar. Matters on the consent calendar are considered routine and will be approved or recommended without discussion. Prior to approval recommendations of the consent calendar, a member of the board committee may request that an item be removed for discussion. If a member of the public would like to speak to an item on the consent calendar, the member should email the board clerk, that's me, prior to the start of the meeting, and I did not receive any. Section A is minutes. Approve, recommend board approval of the minutes of April 14th, 2020 Global Warming Committee meeting.
Director Stanley, what is your pleasure?
Let me see if she's muted again, just a moment. She came in as an attendee again. Allowed to talk. Director Stanley, can you hear me? She says, oh, you said that. Okay, let's see if she can hear us this time.
I don't think she made it. Now she's on.
Yeah, she's on.
She's showing mute.
Yep, I've unmuted her. Member Stanley, can you hear me?
Is she muted on her end?
Probably
I
hooking
don't
up.
know, it doesn't say she is.
I think she calls in from her phone, gets the audio from her phone, so she's probably setting that up.
She just sent a chat. It says she can hear, needs to log in.
All right, I'm going back to my screen. No, I can't play with that. I'm not playing.
Yesterday for Mother's Day, I was on a Zoom call with my
Okay, I'm
mother-in-law's.
here.
Okay, Sherry. My mother-in-law's brother in France. So we had a 6-way Zoom call with one member in France. It worked
Oh, awesome.
flawlessly. It was pretty awesome.
Okay, Member Stanley, we were on the consent calendar. The minutes approve, recommend board approval of the minutes as of April 14, 2020 Global Warming Committee meeting.
Okay, yes. Or I move to whatever.
You move to whatever approve the minutes and the consent calendar.
Yes.
Yeah, I second, and therefore it's passed.
Thank you. Number 5 is discussion. Receive a report on the definition of a carbon negative organization.
Hi, good morning, Chair Wiener and Director Stanley. I'm going to just turn this one over to Michael, and then John is going to talk all about a carbon negative organization and a great big long definition.
Good morning. Michael Savannah, Infrastructure and Planning Department Manager. I hope you are all well. There was a goal defined by the board to become a carbon negative organization by 2031. When staff received this goal and went off to plan how we would reach it, we had no idea what carbon negative actually meant. So we felt like the first step would be to figure out what is carbon negative and define it as a working definition for the organization. So we sought out to do some work, and thought is that we would be able to very quickly go out and speak to some industry professionals, do some dictionary searching, and figure out what carbon negative was not quite that easy. So John is going to present to you all the work that we've done, how we got to carbon negative, what it actually entailed to get there in terms of a definition, what the definition is, and then sort of talk through some of the other initiatives that we have that will connect with this. And afterwards, we'll be open for all of the questions and comments that you all have. And I hope that this is as enjoyable and informative for you all as it was for us when we were doing the work and being enlightened. So, John, it's all yours.
Thank you, Michael. John Haig, and I work in the Infrastructure and Planning Department. I was assigned this particular work assignment. Good morning, everyone. This was actually not as much fun for me as Michael made it sound like it was for him. And in part, that's because I thought I had a pretty good handle on carbon issues and that sort of thing. And I realized that there was a bit of a hole in my understanding when I undertook the research associated to this particular assignment. So basically, I'd like to start off with the title slide, which basically, what is a carbon negative organization? And the what is it is really the key to this assignment. We're talking about sort of the implications of that label. The label, you know, is relatively straightforward and can be understood, I think, just from the words that are used. But how an organization gets there, what it really means operationally, philosophically, financially, those are all the important pieces that didn't seem to be available to us when we were looking for what do people mean when they actually talk about carbon negative, carbon neutral organizations. So if we can move to the second slide, I'd appreciate that.
Is that the second slide? Why is carbon important?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that's fine. Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to make sure.
So as you know, your board set a strategic goal of becoming carbon negative. And defining the end result of the goal is important to be able to define what success means to us. And understanding that definition allows us to plan for actions and deliver on the goal result. And the reason carbon is important to all of that is because carbon is shorthand for carbon-based greenhouse gas emissions, which is sort of central to an organization's environmental stance in the world, if you will. Sort of the definitional statement about your environmental footprint can be linked primarily to greenhouse gas emissions from an organization's operations. Greenhouse gas emissions such as carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and methane are the major contributors to global warming, and hence the reason that they're important. And measuring carbon emissions is a way to measure those environmental impacts that the organization has on the world as a whole. And your district is following the board's direction in terms of setting a carbon target through an emissions inventory, and we'll have to plan to reduce our current emissions to be able to meet your board goal. Next slide, please. So what we did basically talks about the steps that we took to define this term. We did, as Michael referenced, web research on environmental best practices, looking for what other people do in this regard and how they talk about this particular concept. We had discussions with two of our expert consultants in the area, Sage Energy and Kenwood Energy, both of whom have extensive experience with greenhouse gas emissions calculations, baselines, targeting, emissions reduction plans, etc. I reached out to 350.org, which is an organization which was founded to try to keep global greenhouse gas emissions content in the atmosphere below 350 parts per billion, which is why it's called 350.org. We parenthetically are north of 400 now as a species, and it's rising, and so is the temperature. I reached out to the Climate Center, which is a regional organization that I have worked with previously in Sonoma County. They were called the Center for Climate Protection for a while. This is their core business, greenhouse gas emissions reduction planning, particularly with communities and political organizations that lead the communities. And then we did consultation with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, GHG emissions reduction experts. I again have some experience working with them locally, and Sage had asked them to look at our greenhouse gas baseline emissions report, and I was referred to them for purposes of discussing this definition. So after all of this work, we realized that the definition that most people utilize is a little bit circular. We have basically carbon neutral or carbon negative organizations are those organizations which have either a neutral or a negative emissions profile, which basically is a tautology. It's true, but it doesn't tell you anything that's of any use at all. It's sort of like any other term that everybody knows what it means when you use it in common speech, but when asked to drill down to explain the impact or implication or practical application of the term, people are more at a loss. And that's where I found myself, which was the source of my frustration. Next slide, please. So this is what I did as a draft, and then brought it forward to Michael and to Andrew and to our experts and shared it with 350.org and the Climate Center and with Bay Area Air Quality Management, as well as our consultants. I asked all of them what they thought about this. And if you look at the definition as it stands now, it really is sort of the so what about the label. You know, we want to be a carbon negative organization. What does that mean to us in terms of the science, if you will, the measuring of things, and how are we going to take steps to get there? It's a real mouthful, and I have to say, I didn't get any negative feedback from anybody about the length of the statement. All of them felt that it was a fair and reasonable way to talk about this particular concept that the district is interested in doing. So I think we could probably come back to this later if you would like to have a further discussion, but for now, let's move on to the next slide and talk about some of the elements of that. So we talked about the element. I want to talk about the elements of the definition and what do we plan to do about them in terms of this district and our particular approach to this question. So completed an inventory. You can't really measure a carbon negative status until you know what your emissions are and how you're reducing them, so that you can actually measure at the end and say we're negative, or we're neutral, or we're at some positive number but going in the right direction. So completed an inventory. Have we done that yet? Well, we have a draft GHG baseline report which was delivered to the district last week, and we're reviewing the final. It's the final report. It's no longer a draft. We're reviewing it to see if we have any questions, and we're preparing a board report. We hope to be able to submit it to senior management for discussion at the end of this month and bring it to the board for discussion probably next month or the month after. I assume we will be coming to the Global Warming Committee first, but that'll be something that Andrew and Michael will advise on. I wanted to talk a little bit about routinely measured progress. So the Climate Action Plan that the board approved in 2019 provides the framework for us in terms of what we're doing with respect to our initiatives and our plan for reductions. And we're planning, based on that, for annual reporting back to the board of our progress towards the ultimate goal of 2031 being negative. Another element I wanted to highlight was the reduced emissions to the lowest practical level statement. That's kind of important for the board's consideration because we have a number of elements that will be coming forward in some form or fashion to the board for your consideration over the next several months. They'll include comprehensive energy project that ENGIE is proposing to do under the 4217 umbrella. I'm not sure what that will ultimately be and what they will recommend, but each one of their elements will have a greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential or tag, if you will, so that we'll know what the impact of those measures will be once we decide to move forward on any or all of them. There'll be some discussions of additional renewable energy sources because obviously if we can have renewable energy, we'll eliminate the carbon that we currently have in any of our standard energy resources. We'll be discussing greening the fleet, which is another source of carbon emissions. Obviously the combustion of fossil fuels is going to give off greenhouse gases, and greening the fleet is an initiative that is part of the overall climate action plan that we've been discussing. We'll look at commute reductions. The employee commute associated to our greenhouse gas emissions baseline is not directly in the control of the district, but it is fair to say that we must account for the emissions of the people that we ask to come to work on a daily basis to be, you know, completely transparent about what the district's footprint actually is. And then plant process changes, which is going to be a big piece of the ENGIE discussion and also an important piece of our greenhouse gas emissions profile because of the fact that the treatment of human waste products gives off greenhouse gases just as a result of the chemistry involved there. And what we do about that will be important in terms of moving towards a more sustainable footprint. The lowest practical levels reflects the fact that we are going to still have greenhouse gas emissions as a result of the fact that employees come to work. And we're still going to have some emissions from plant processes, and we're still going to have some emissions from our treatment, and there won't be anything we can really do about that. There will be a minimum level that we can get to, the lowest practical level, and then we'll have to consider what to do from there if the board continues to direct us to a carbon neutral or carbon negative stance. And that is the last element I wanted to talk about in the definition, which is organizational use of offsets and credits. We'll have to account for remaining emissions through things like sequestration, other mitigation efforts, and partnerships with other organizations to try to account for the remaining greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we can't eliminate through efficiency or change of methodology in terms of how energy is provided. Some of those things are called blue initiatives, which relates to the sequestration of carbon in water, which is an interesting concept that is being looked at in a variety of arenas, and is something that the district is uniquely positioned to be able to consider because of our proximity to the ocean and our involvement with the tidal lands initiatives that are sort of emerging from our general area. And then that the use of tidal lands for sequestration is also a possibility. The sequestration being the removal of carbon from the environment, from the air, and the placement of it into the ground where emissions, for example, from oil come from. They're sequestered in the ground and they're locked up, and then once we utilize that energy resource, we're releasing emissions. It's completing the circle and bringing it back into a ground sequestration alternative. The use of tree plantings and then solids to soils partnerships is another element we want to bring forward for consideration. If, for example, we are able to claim partial credit for partnerships involving the planting of trees or the replanting of trees in harvested areas, or the protection of existing agriculture to allow it to continue to do the natural sequestration that comes from photosynthesis, we would be able to claim some credit or offsets through those sorts of measures. Please move on to the next slide. So, and then what do we do then? We're going to be working in partnership to remove more carbon than is absolutely necessary to cancel our environmental debt due to GHG emissions. So that's what creates the carbon negative status. It basically takes us to the point where once you're at neutral, once we have accounted for everything we're responsible for, to get to a negative status, we're going to have to account for somebody else's emissions. We're going to have to take one more ton of greenhouse gases out of the environment that we put into it to actually be in a negative status. It's not easy to achieve that. There is no currently known affordable path for the district to get to that point. It's expensive to remove carbon from the atmosphere, which is one of the reasons it's not being done more broadly at this point, and it gets more expensive the closer to zero you get, because you take advantage of all of the cost-effective measures first, and then you move through the cost-neutral measures, and then you start to have to invest money in solutions, and the further you go, the more expensive your alternatives to reduce the last few drops of carbon emissions that you're responsible for. So the end result from our research and from our analysis is that we as a district cannot achieve neutral or negative status without the use of offsets or emissions, because emissions are part of our treatment process, and as long as we're in the business of treating waste, we're going to have some net emissions that will have to be offset in some fashion. Next slide, please. So, I wanted the board not to be too upset and the committee to still retain hope that we can make progress towards and maybe even achieve this goal. As Director Weiner is fond of saying, chemistry is the answer. The study of chemistry in the natural world is being done as we speak, and it's giving us insights into potential solutions that aren't known yet, but may be coming forward. And I think the district will be poised and prepared to partner with organizations in working towards that, and also to adopt those measures once we have done what we can do to take care of the things from the technologies and approaches that are already known. Advances are being made currently in sequestration of gaseous emissions in ocean and tidal lands, and as I pointed out again, we have access to that, and it's a really intriguing area of potential for organizations like BAAQMD and the Climate Center. They're looking at these blue initiatives, blue standing for water and the oceans, of course. We can do some things like 100% green electricity, through the use of our current providers or through offsetting, and cogeneration of methane at the plant may actually be affordable options for the district. The difference in cost at this point between being partially green and completely green on the energy side from Marine Clean Energy is not all that significant. Green fleet development is becoming more feasible for passenger vehicles. It's here already. For vans and light trucks, it's either here or coming soon. And long-haul trucking is being made more possible through the use of electric vehicles for what you would call tractor-trailer situations. So I would expect that heavy equipment is something that is on the horizon as well, although I don't have specifics on that. I expect that to become more available to us as we move forward. Solids to soils could open tree planting partnerships and agricultural sequestration opportunities for the district. Once we move to the drying of our sludge as opposed to the current situation, we can create soil amendments that will allow us to utilize our production of solids in a way that will supplement and augment agricultural uses, which will allow us to gain credit for those measures. Partnership with other groups like Bay Area Air Quality Management District in new approaches to make real GHG reductions may be available because of the work this district has done to date. My conversation with the Air Quality District was one where the comment that she made was that I always seem to find the cool projects to work on. That's kind of true. I've fallen into a lot of great stuff, but the district's board gave us the direction to move the way we're moving, and has created the opportunity for these sorts of partnerships because you're willing to consider adopting things like horizontal levees, and to work in partnership with other regional partners to achieve climate goals for the community that are outside of what might be the traditional four corners of your specific operation. And that approach and that attitude, I think, is going to open up the opportunity for additional partnerships. And then the last point I wanted to leave you with is we have almost 11 years to be able to get to this level. So we don't have to do it this month or this year, although some, including some directors, may argue that we're so far behind we should do it this year. I think that we have a decade, basically, to be able to work on this and to watch for new developments and new opportunities and to take advantage of them. Next slide, please. The fiscal impact slide. This is kind of important for the board to consider. We don't know what the cost to the district will ultimately be to achieve carbon negative status, because we don't know the measures that we'll need to pursue to get there. We do know, as I told you obliquely previously, that the early adoption items that we're going to do will probably pay for themselves, because energy efficiency is a source of revenue that can be used to pay for improvements. Other measures will be cost neutral, and we can adopt them as long as we can handle the adoption of the new measures operationally. And given your current management team, I don't expect any issues with that at all. You've got a very capable operational structure. So I think that's easily achievable. The additional reductions where you go from the first two into now we're taking a deeper dive, it's going to be a policy decision for the board because the costs are going to increase beyond the payback, if you will, and there's going to be a real investment required by the district. And then carbon neutrality or negative status is going to be very expensive without new technology or breakthroughs. And they are coming. In all likelihood, they will present themselves. And when they do, this picture will change. But until they do, it's a consideration for the board in terms of how much is it going to cost us to go how far to get to the ultimate goal. And then the last thing I wanted to say about this is the state of California has a goal of being carbon neutral by 2045. So we're not working on this alone. And the key to that is the state seems to think that through the use of sequestration, we're going to be able to get to carbon neutrality as a state. If the state can get there, maybe the district can get to a negative status, utilizing some of the groundbreaking work that the state will be required to accomplish to be able to get to where it needs to go. Of course, we're 14 years ahead of them in terms of deadlines, and I didn't put that on the slide, but you can see it by doing the math. So we may be helping them as much as they're helping us as we move forward to taking advantage of new opportunities. Next slide, please. The next steps. Okay, so we expect that next steps will include the acceptance of the baseline report when senior management is prepared to bring that forward, and the adoption of a baseline calculation so that we can say, by putting a peg in the ground, here's where we are today, or from 2019's perspective, and this is where we're moving from to get to our target. And then we'll amend the cap to reflect the baseline. That's a point that was made by the state of California earlier in evaluating our cap. You need to have a baseline and you need to link it to measures if you're going to have a reduction plan. We're going to investigate potential for greenhouse gas emissions available through the ESCO project that NG is currently working on a proposal for us on. And I would expect that the district will adopt some of those measures and initiatives, which will get greenhouse gas emissions reductions for the district. We need to create a plan that will involve the implementation of the reduction measures, utilizing board approval, of course, but we'll have to have a plan that says, we're here today and these are the things we're going to implement over this period of time to get to whatever expected level there is. And then we're going to have to measure annually to make sure that we are continuing in the right direction. One of the things that I have personal experience in is that when the district or the organization I was working with had a lower employee population count, it had a lower greenhouse gas emissions baseline. And as we added staff, the GHG baseline went up, which required us to do more reductions to get back to where we originally were, because every employee that works for the district has a greenhouse gas emissions footprint. And there's an incremental increase in the cost of the use of electricity or fleet fuels or whatever it happens to be. So it's important for us to measure annually going forward, both to make sure we're not doing things that are increasing our footprint unintentionally, as well as making sure we're making progress on reducing the footprint as we move forward towards our target. And then we're on the next slide, which is, do you have any questions for staff? At this point, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to ask Michael and Andrew if they have anything further to add at this point, and then I think we're all available for questions. Thanks very much for your patience with me in walking through this.
I don't have anything additional to add other than I think you did a really good job, John. Thank you. I think this presents a really good understanding of what carbon negative is and sort of the feet in front of us to get there, or the road in front of us to get there. Thank you.
Likewise, John, I appreciate the presentation, the work that went into this. I think that right now, after whatever questions that we have from the board members, that we certainly need to go back to that slide with the definition and sort of work through that. It runs counter to what we like to be able to do, have a nice, crisp, not too many words on a PowerPoint slide, but this is a little different in that this is essentially a working session, and we're using the PowerPoint as our working document to go over things. But we need to talk about that definition. And as John pointed out, there are a lot of things that we can do fairly early. When I say early, meaning in the next 5, 6 years or so, that can reduce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's crucial for us to have a baseline from which we can measure, and that's the greenhouse gas emission baseline report, which will be coming forward soon. And we would like to bring to this committee at the next meeting and to be able to discuss what that report looks like. And then we have some strategy of how we utilize that, how we implement that. We can talk that over at the committee, and then that goes to the board. But it gets harder and harder as we get past a lot of the big things that we can get. It gets more expensive to get a smaller and smaller percentage. So those are things that we'll have to be looking at as we move forward and we get into those outlying years and we get closer to carbon neutral and hopefully someday carbon negative. But for now, I think we can lay out a pretty good roadmap with an awful lot of things that we know we can do that can significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions over the first portion of this. And then it just does get a lot more difficult. And hopefully by then there'll be some additional technologies and things that we can do, or methods or other innovative ideas for how to, as John mentioned, a key element there is how can we sequester carbon, such as the trees, the planting, and there's been work trying to sequester carbon into concrete because that's such an expensive process and yet an essential building product. And how do you capture some of those emissions and actually sequester them into the cement product? And there's all sorts of things like that going on out there. It comes back to the chemistry again. But again, thanks, John, and whatever questions that the directors have, and then I'd say go back to the definition.
Okay, thank you. Before I say anything, I'd like to turn it over to Director Stanley.
Okay, I have 2 questions. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, so we hear a lot these days about methane gas being released through the Arctic ice. And I'm wondering, is any of those negative impacts possible if we sequester carbon in water or land in the water, under the land that's in the water, on sea life or plants or anything like that? Do we know anything about that?
I don't have a tremendous amount of information. I'm sorry, I don't know who I might have cut off there. This is John. I think I have maybe more information than Michael or Andrew, so I'll try to answer it from staff's perspective. We don't have a lot of information about the methane issues at the polar caps. We do know that it's happening with the melting of the ice because of the fact that it's releasing the trapped carbon there. Carbon can be trapped in water, carbon can be trapped in ice, and carbon can be trapped in soil or in the land. The world's GHG parts per billion count is going up in part because of the melting of the caps, and the world will have to account for that methane. The amount of carbon that we would need to sequester in the water is not apparently an issue from a water chemistry sea life perspective, at least as far as I've been able to read. And certainly sequestering it in the soil or in trees is not going to harm anything. It's just a bigger lift. The more fossil fuels we burn, the more methane that gets released from the ice, the bigger our problem is. But the world is pretty adaptive, and the fact that the world shut down during the pandemic for a while showed some remarkable changes in the overall atmospheric conditions, and I'm hopeful that if we're better about our fossil fuel use, we'll be able to balance the methane and maybe not have so much ice melt. I don't know if anybody else has anything to offer.
Okay, I can move on to my second question. Okay.
Yeah, please. You got the floor.
So my second question is it possible, I know, John, that you've probably seen what Santa Rosa does with their composting and how they suck the air out of the building where they're composting soil and filter that down in the land and has it bubble up to the surface, and by the time it gets to the surface, it's clean of all methane gas. Is it possible for us to create something like that?
That's a really interesting question. Yes, I am aware of Sonoma County's steps in that regard. And I think as part of the NG project, when they come forward with their plan, you will see the soils drying situation and a proposal about filtration and capture. The approach that they want to take about our sludge drying is one that will result in a significant greenhouse gas emissions reduction. It's one of the side benefits of getting out of the sludge drying business. So I would say yes, that is a possibility for the district in some form or fashion. It's going to depend on the price tag and on the technology based on our system versus Santa Rosa's, but it is certainly in the discussions.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
All right. First of all, this is awesome. Because of John's inquiries into the whole notion of carbon net negative, it turns out that even the leading lights have not thought it through in a practical manner. They have the goal, but they don't have any definition of the term that can be used by industry or human activity to accomplish the goal that they have set. And I'm just so impressed that we're going to be the first in the leading light of environmentalism, San Francisco area, the Bay Area, to have a definite, and have thought about it and have a definition. I think that I know that everybody here but me is a practical person. And, so you're all trying to think, wow, how are we going to do this and be practical and save money? And I know that's where your focus is, and that's great. But to me, the biggest thing that we're started doing is to turn an idea into reality, and that is like magic. In my view, that's magic, and that magic nets people billions of dollars in the world of computer, programming and development of applications and all that. It's not that easy. It takes a lot of marshaling of resources, and we've made like tremendous progress in that regard. In fact, we're talking about a plan, not just the idea of a goal, and that to me is an accomplishment, a big accomplishment. And so I'm not discouraged by any of the facts that John presented about the practicality of reaching this goal, because apparently we're the first ones taking this step. And when people start considering that there is somebody working on the practicality of it, they'll get involved, and ideas will start turning into reality. And we'll be connected with those ideas because we're on this pathway just slightly ahead, because we're developing a plan. So I just think this is awesome, totally awesome. And the fact that we don't know how we're going to do it is not surprising, but the fact that we're thinking about it is the big issue. And with all the smart people that are at the district right now, and the interest that you've all shown for taking this on, I have no doubt that as time goes on, our plan will become more and more solid, and then we can start moving on reality once the plan has been established. Also, plans are iterative, so they can be improved on the fly. They're not solid things, they're just ideas, and so that part is obvious. We're going to have to do that. And so I'm just, yeah, rah, rah, great. And I'm so pleased that you guys have taken this on, and I do believe that you're totally capable and also practical. So something will happen that won't cost too much, that we can afford. I'd like to throw out, in addition to chemistry, our plant is biological. And so some of the solutions may come from organisms, growing different organisms. One question I have is, what stage of treatment does the water leave our plant? I know ultimately, by the time it gets to Chevron, our water is treated tertiary, has gone through tertiary treatment. But I'm not quite clear at what stage our water is when it's been sent to either Richmond or Chevron. What stage of treatment is that called technically?
Does anybody want to take that? Andrew, Michael, I can offer my thought if you want. Hearing no one. I believe it's secondary treated. We're at secondary levels when we pass the water out, and then it's further treated over by East Bay Mud before it goes to Chevron. The plant does not have tertiary treatment capability at this time.
Yeah, and didn't we make some modifications that sort of encroach on tertiary treatment, where our newest basins and newest process remove more ammonia and more nitrogen than, I mean, could be almost considered tertiary, somewhere like 2.5 or something. Is that this is my impression. I don't know technically if that's true or not.
Andrew?
I think that's probably a fair assessment. If we had Aaron here, he might talk a lot more detail about that. But that's what we entered into with East Bay Mud, was delivering them our secondary, treated effluent, and yet we had to improve the quality of that effluent. And so I think that's exactly what you're referring to, Chair Weiner, is that it was improved, but it's still considered secondary treatment.
Yes.
So I think they've tried this, and I don't know. I talked to a guy who's one of the main lobbyists for CASA, and he was formerly with the EPA, and so there was some thought about using algae in processes for treatment plants, and they had limited success, but I'm not sure what their goal was when they were using the algae. And so one of the things that I would be interested in, I think might be of interest, but that's for the technical folk, would be to I'm going to do some research on my own, but to investigate whether there's a tertiary treatment that involves algae, because algae works opposite of the biota that we're using now to digest the inflow, and that is it puts out oxygen and takes up CO2. And I know now we take our blowers and we blow oxygen to make our biota grow really fast and create an environment where they're like happy. And then my thought would be if you could siphon off the CO2 that they create and bubble that into algae ponds, which also are taking up the nutrients and giving off O2 rather than CO2, we might be able to do two things at once, which is a tertiary treatment where we take up even more nitrogen and more ammonia, and then our byproduct is not CO2 but O2. Anyway, just throwing that out there for something that might be of interest. And other than that, I don't have any. I mean, you guys are the experts. I love how you're attacking the problem. I think you're on the right track. I like the approach of being, critical of getting down to the last millimeter and how are we going to do that. But I also like, John, you're throwing out there, got 11 years and everybody's working on the same problem. So we don't necessarily need to worry or make our plan so rock solid that we can't move forward. And when the report that was SAGE's report regarding how much greenhouse gas we were throwing in the air by drying our biosolids in the open, that just taking care of that is going to bring us miles instead of inches toward our ultimate goal. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic, and the fact that we're the first to do a carbon negative definition is awesome. Did you get any feedback from them going, wow, why didn't we think of this?
Basically, I'm not sure that the other organizations realize the practical impact of having a statement like this, because they're not actually executing the work. You know, the 350 and the Climate Center are more advocating for people to take steps, not worried about sort of the how-to, the way we did. And Bay Area Air Quality Management District, their response back was one tweak, which I think you saw in the email, but basically that they agreed with the definition, which sort of begs the question of why somebody didn't, put it out there before, but, and maybe somebody did, but I can't find it anywhere. So I don't have a really good answer for that. I also would like to add to your comments that when I reference chemistry, I wasn't being specific about the actual chemistry like in a classroom. I was referring more broadly to the biological solution that you were discussing as well. There is some water chemistry involved, but I think biological solutions, and whether it's algae or mushrooms or whatever else, I think that's probably the direction that you would go to. And there are, obviously chemical reactions that go on in those processes, but I think you're spot on in terms of looking at this from a living organism perspective.
All right. So I guess our next step is to maybe go over I looked over the definition and I did not have any changes. I thought as a working definition it was great, and the fact that it's got so many sentences doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I know a picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes it's like the wrong 1,000 words are conveyed by the picture. So I'm okay with words. Director Stanley, do you have any comments on it as it is, or do you think we need to bring our comments back at the next meeting of the full, of our committee?
No, I'm beyond pleased. Well done, all of you. Thank you so much.
Do you, and then, Andrew, did you have some thoughts on it that you wanted to include in the definition?
No, it was, when John went through it, he went through the slides and we quickly went past this, and I didn't know if you'd had a chance to really read through the rest of the slides laid out as John referred to them as the elements inside of this definition, and we talked about each of those. So I think that the last thing would be if you had any specific comments, or this is the one we have here, or maybe we'll go through it and and change a word or two here and there to perhaps make it a sentence or two shorter. Yes. And tighten it up and still say the same thing. Wanted to get your thoughts and your ideas on it, and then we could finalize that and then bring that back here along with the next meeting. We'd suggest talking about the greenhouse gas emissions baseline report, and maybe have a discussion next meeting here with, well, here's the definition with a couple of minor changes, and here's the baseline report, and then we move forward from there.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, really, just having that those words on paper and knowing that we're the first to actually tackle it means that we, no pressure. We could be wrong. So what? No big deal.
Often wrong, but never in doubt.
Yeah.
Well, I have
That's my mantra.
That's nice, John. That's nice. I often have doubts, so you can do it without doubt. That's excellent.
Yeah, as I said, often wrong, but the doubt part. Andrew, in reference to your last comment, I was wondering, my thought all along has been get the Global Warming Committee's reaction to sort of my rough definition, and then maybe we could utilize CV strategies to help us streamline it or say it in a more elegant way. I put a lot of thought into this, and it makes sense to me, but it may not be as accessible or as effective as maybe somebody whose career it is to do communications. Maybe there's a slightly different take that they might have. It might be worth at least a discussion.
No, I agree with that, and I think that this definition, we wanted to put it out here and get any feedback from this committee. And the notes that I just wrote down here is that what we might do between now and the next committee is to polish this definition, which is, I think, exactly the same thing you were just suggesting there, John, is just run it through a number of us, a little more peer review, have some other people look at it, and make it's there. The information is there. I think John did a great job of pulling that together to say, fundamentally, this is what it is, and now we just maybe clean it up or polish it a little bit. And that is then the guiding definition that we move forward with the next step, the greenhouse gas emissions baseline, which becomes the critical point from which we start to measure things moving forward. And then, as you mentioned, Director Wiener, that it's a plan and that's subject to change. And that's the way I always look at a plan. All the plan is the document from which you deviate, in that it sets the guidelines, and everybody knows that we're moving away from, this was where we started, and we made some changes, but we all agreed where we changed and what we started from, and it gives us that roadmap or that guidance going forward. So, of course, it has to change, but I do think that we have a lot of steps that we know we can take in the next few years that are pretty clear, and we start to move on those, and then the plan evolves and changes as we move forward from there, including right now this definition.
Director Stanley, do you have anything further?
No, I'm in total agreement, and I'm just tickled pink. Thank you so much.
It's too bad you're not displaying your visage. Director, Mr. Savannah, you have any further comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, I think we know our next steps, and great stuff. The fact that we're even focused on a direction is as much as could be hoped for at this time. I mean, 2031 is a ways away, and the goal is, a reach, but if you aim for the stars, you might come close, and that's pretty cool. So, and I think as we move forward, others will follow our lead. And, we can only do so much as a little sewage district, but in concert with other sewage districts, we can make a huge difference in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, since our product is greenhouse gases, unfortunately. And so this is really a great start, just wonderful. Okay, next item.
I just want to make sure I'm off mute, am I?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Number 6, matters from staff, general manager. A, reports on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee.
No, nothing further.
Next item, please.
Number 7, matters from members of the board. A, reports on issues pertaining to the work of the committee.
I have, what's the second one? I forget.
Future agenda items.
Okay, yeah, I've still been going through our sister agencies and looking for what they're doing. So far, I haven't come across anybody that's far ahead of us or far behind us. We're all pretty much in the same technological wheelhouse. I think we're behind in terms of our drying of our biosolids and our use of our biosolids. Everyone else is, not everyone else, but many are moving ahead. And some are just beginning to make the changes that we're thinking about. So that's my report from that. It's a big list and there's a lot of variation. To anybody who doesn't know, the biggest wastewater treatment plant is in Sacramento. It's their area treatment. They claim to be the largest in Northern California. So Central San, watch out. That's my report. Director Stanley?
I have nothing.
Okay, thank
I
you.
have nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item.
7B, future agenda items, informal observations and inquiries regarding the business of the district or requests for placement of items of interest on the future agenda.
Director Stanley?
So we're going to hear from NG or somebody next meeting. Is that correct, Andrew? Did you say that?
We plan to bring the greenhouse gas baseline report.
That's the.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Looking forward to hearing that. But I have no future agenda items at this time.
Ditto for me. Next item.
Number 8 is adjournment.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Please, this punch, and you can see I'm not turning pink.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Same to you all. Thank you for your
Thank
effort.
you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.